Everybody ready to paint today. Everybody ready to make a painting. Everybody ready to paint today. Hello, welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and we're gonna make some paintings today. And the paintings, not just one, but two, are made by one of the most influential artists, at the very least, positive or negative. There's many people who fall on either side of the spectrum. The artist Andy Warhol. So Andy Warhol is personally one of my favorite artists, but I can certainly see why some people are not as big a fan of his as I am. Andy Warhol, it's not too small a thing to say that he changed the art world. Absolutely, there's no argument about that. Again, positively or negatively, and we'll get into why some people really are not happy with him and why some people love him. But I also think he also changed the world. He made pop culture something that could be appreciated and that people would have no qualms about talking about their love for popular culture. Prior to Andy Warhol, you would not have heard anybody, except maybe children, talking about how much they loved Batman and Superman and comic books and television, things that are considered to be accessible, the culture that is accessible to everybody. That was really seen as sort of like the realm of children and the realm of the lower, poor, working class people. So you would never have heard, a president talking about their favorite rock and roll music, or a high class, somebody on page 4 of whatever, the New York Post, like the society pages, talking about about the latest television show they saw, because all of that was sort of seen as the lower culture. People would be proud to talk about their favorite painter or their favorite novelist, but talking about your favorite, trashy reality television show, no, that was not cool at all. So, and again, some people would say that that's, Andy Warhol destroyed culture as we know it, and some people would say he really opened it up and made it way more accessible. So let's just take a quick look at Andy Warhol, born Andrew Warhola, and I think I can't remember the exact reason why the A was dropped. If I recall, it was something when one of his illustrations was published in a magazine, somebody forgot to put the A at the end, and he, I think, just was like, oh, cool, I like that. Which is sort of how he approached everything, is like, cool, yeah, sure, that sounds good. I imagine if somebody had changed his name and put a R at the front or a K, he would have been, okay, let's go with that. I'll be Carhola instead of Warhol, right? Like, a very interesting person. There's lots of interviews with him, and he comes off as a little bit of a aloof personality, as totally ambivalent to things, which again is why a lot of people, particularly at the time, really detested him. They really thought that he was kind of like the harbinger of all evil. He's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You could see here the soup cans. It was sort of his big first real explosion into the art world. Prior to that, he was a very well-known illustrator, highly in demand for his illustrations that were in like the fashion magazines. And maybe I'll take a look at some of those here in a second. Just a quick zoom down. And then died in 1987 of a gallbladder surgery, which was a surprise. Like it should have been a minor surgery, but he ended up dying because of it. And there was a lot of controversy after he died about what happened there. see. So, if you do a quick search for images of Andy Warhol, what I think is really interesting is you see more images of Andy Warhol himself, the artist, than his artwork, which is very unusual. If you look up almost every other artist you can think of, their own artwork shows up, and sometimes you have to kind of dig around to find a photograph of them. Andy Warhol does not have that problem because he also elevated himself into a celebrity, right? His own face was very recognizable, which is, totally the opposite of an artist like Banksy today, who is anonymous. We don't know what he looks like. I mean, some people think they know who he is, but for the most part, he hasn't claimed his, put a name to, or a face to the name. I mean, look at all these photographs of Andy Warhol. So he's also very well known for taking already existing images and transforming them into art. And the soup can was sort of the big, shot across the bow in art of taking something super mundane like the Campbell soup can, which at the time, most people probably had in their kitchen somewhere, and to take something as kind of lowly and boring and ubiquitous as a soup can and make a painting of it was really kind of shocking to people. People were just like, this does not belong in an art gallery. It's a stupid soup can. Why would somebody, devote their time and energy to painting one, and let alone waste my time having to look at one, right? So there was, again, a lot of anger at the time when Andy Warhol first started showing these, and people were, especially some of the more traditional artists, if you think of who he, the preceding generation of artists were the abstract expressionists, like Willem de Kooning, Elaine de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Lee Krasner, like these painters who worked on giant surfaces, very action-oriented painting, splatters everywhere, mostly abstract painting. In fact, a lot of people talk about Andy Warhol's painting as the new realist. In France, pop art wasn't called pop art, but nouveau réalisme, which is like the new realism, like painting exactly what you see, right? So, which is kind of interesting because I don't think most people would think necessarily of Andy Warhol as a realist painter, but compared to the previous generation, he certainly was, right? Because they were making images of essentially nothing, right? Just paint. So here's a bunch of his soup cans. You could see originally when they were exhibited, they looked like this. And each of those paintings were, I don't know what that size would be, like 20 by 30-ish or so. And they're all hand painted. Later on, they used the silk screen to manufacture them faster and make multiples, which is a whole other thing he was involved in. Here's another painting we're going to make today as well, which is this famous banana image that he created for the cover of the Velvet Underground and Nico, their record, which I think was released in the 66 or 1967. And the original pressing of the album, let's see, was kind of like this. If you could see that, there was a, like the banana was a sticker which you could peel, which would reveal this pink banana, like the fruit of the banana underneath. And so finding an actual original pressing of this that hasn't been peeled is also an extremely expensive collector's item, because there was a certain amount that were never peeled. So, just taking, again, the lowly banana and transforming it into an artwork, or putting it on the cover of a rock album, that in and of itself seems like really bizarre. Like, why would anybody do that? Like, normally if you think of like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, there'd be pictures of their faces because you'd want to identify Mick Jagger and some kind of good-looking guy or woman on the cover of a rock album. Andy Warhol's like, no, I'm going to put a banana on the cover. And it sounds silly, but it certainly stuck out at the time. Like, it was unlike anything that you would find at a record store. So it certainly achieved his desires. A couple of things that I'm going to talk about how to do some of the artwork today is we're going to use some graphite tracing paper. If you don't have any, we're still going to be able to do it. I'm going to show you how to do everything without any extra materials whatsoever. But if you want to, I'm also going to demonstrate how you can do this using graphite paper. So if you want to order some, there's some links below. Graphite paper used to be quite common, but because if you remember when you used to run your credit card through that machine and they clunk clunk, and then there would be a couple of receipts and they peel one off and one had like that black ink on it, that was carbon or graphite paper, right? So you can buy these at Michael's, at most art supply stores, even I've seen these at the dollar store, and I have some here that I got from a local dollar store. And so sometimes it's really surprising where you can find these things. They're not, sometimes you got to really look around, and then sometimes you're like, well, that's odd that they're selling this. But so we're going to use some graphite paper as well. There is some images that I've made a Dropbox folder with some downloadable images that you can go and print off of your computer. I tried my printer, which I haven't printed anything off this printer in probably a couple of years. I'm surprised there's still ink in it. So there's an image of the Campbell soup can, and then there's an image somewhere here of the banana, which you can print off as well. And you can see I've done some. I couldn't actually find regular photocopy paper in our house. I only have kind of heavier sketch paper, so we'll see if that works. But I've also just printed it off on, just regular lined paper, because ideally the thinner the paper, the carbon process will work better. But we're going to do a little experimenting as we go here. So if you don't have a printer, you haven't printed anything off, and you haven't got any carbon paper, have no fear. I'm going to do a version where I'm just eyeballing it and drawing it, and so you can kind of see how that works. And I'm also going to do another version using some of these extra materials, just so you can see how they work, and we can compare and contrast them. So ultimately, I'm going to be making at least 4 paintings today, 2 versions of each one. So I think we should just jump right into it. I think everyone's ready to make some paintings, so let's get out our materials. We're only going to use a few colors today. As you saw in the images, there's really only black and red and yellow, so we probably won't need most of our other colors. I think the 2 main colors we're going to use are the cool yellow and the warm red. I'll have to, if we need more, we'll get more out. So, and I'm going to need maybe a rag just in case. So, we'll have our colors, we've got our palette. Let's get some canvas out. As I've mentioned many times before, what I've done is pre-gessoed these canvases, right? Using just a simple gesso you can get from any art supply store. This Stevenson gesso, I think, is a Canadian brand, but there's, Liquitex and, what are the other brand? Golden, and every other paint manufacturer makes a simple gesso. And I've just brushed this on. I've talked about it before, but I know that this might be the first time you've ever seen me, so I'm not going to assume that you've seen all the previous episodes. So what I do, once I've got these canvases gessoed and they've dried for at least an hour or so that the paint is no longer wet, I can take a block of sandpaper. Here's my 220 grit sandpaper, and I can take a block of wood and wrap it around. I find a block of wood works really well. Here's another, this is a pre-made one, where I've taken a piece of sandpaper and then just use like a staple gun or some nails so that it doesn't unravel on you. Anyway, I'm just gonna give this a quick sand. And I've got a few of them, so I'm going to do a... When I do, when I gesso my canvases, I usually have a bunch on the go. In fact, I started a bunch right before today's episode, and I've got 6 of them sitting there on the ground drying. Depending on how thick you apply the paint, it can take maybe 30 minutes for them to be ready to paint on. Ideally, letting it dry overnight would be best, because sometimes just because the paint is dry to the touch doesn't mean it's fully cured, right? Sometimes it can take a little bit longer for that paint to really dry, or maybe the top layer is dry but underneath is a little bit wet. So I got these. Often I'll wipe these down with a cloth. A little damp cloth is helpful. So I got these ready to go. So again, I'm gonna make both of these paintings purely by eye to begin with, just to show you that it can be done. And then kind of in the second half of the class, I'm going to use the carbon paper to show you how I can do that as well. So let's get a pencil out and let's bring up our first image. So I think what I'm going to start out with is the banana, just because the banana is maybe a little bit easier. So those of you that are kind of watching and like, oh man, I'm going to eyeball that soup can? Are you kidding me? That's a little bit tricky. So we'll start out with something a little bit more manageable for people. And okay, so how am I going to get this image onto a canvas? Just using my eyes. So let's bring up a different view here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to try to find out where the midway point of this picture is. And, you know, I could change the orientation of this picture, right? I could make the banana take up more space here if I wanted. Or, because originally this would have been a square format, right? This is on the cover of a record album. So I'm just sort of looking at it right now and thinking, maybe that version might be kind of nice, just so I can kind of really use up most of this space. So should I do that or should I do this? Let me just take a look at my printout. So if I do my second one, you know, I think personally I might do both of them upright like this, just so they can both stand side by side and we can kind of compare them later on and see how close I got to the original. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this into quarters, right, to find out where the middle is. And the middle here is probably right about there in that picture. All right, so, and I'm going to erase and also paint over all of this white anyway, right? So don't worry about drawing too lightly, because we can make as many mistakes as we like and cover them up with paint. So if we imagine this here, let's just draw a diagonal line kind of right through. All right, just to kind of help us figure out, right, where this is going to go. So let's curve up a little bit here and curve up a little bit here. So we have this kind of semicircle. And let's do the same here. Let's imagine this is like a pipe or something, right? Okay, so they're just sort of kind of parallel here. If you think it's too wide or too narrow, then that's fine, or you can just cut it in a little bit like that. Okay, so let's try to get kind of this tip of the banana here. If we imagine this is sort of the midway, it looks kind of like it comes to a point there, and this part of the banana here. Like that. And then we'll draw the whole shape of this banana. So the banana comes up here. And then we've got this tip here. And I might actually just bring this down a little bit so it fits here. So I'm not cramming the tip of the banana into the picture here. Okay. And so even at this point, I'm just going to do a little bit of erasing because I got all these lines around here and it's a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to clean up my picture a little bit. Okay. So the next thing, let's divide. As if this banana. I don't know the terminology for bananas. Maybe there's a banana expert out there who knows what are these things called? You know, when you peel the banana, the skin, these layers of who knows what this is called. So I'm just kind of adding a few of these lines on there. And maybe not exactly like the original. But the good thing with this is I don't think it really makes a difference how accurate we are about painting this exact banana that he drew, right? Okay. So, and then I'm just going to kind of quickly detail. We've got, kind of a little bit darker, some shadow here. I'm not going to spend too long on this because I'm going to paint actually all of this yellow right over top anyway. So I'm just sort of almost like kind of thinking in advance of what some of this will look like. Okay. I think that's pretty good for the banana itself. If you want to add any of these extra details like the signature, then I'll show you how I would do that. So to get the signature, I'm going to kind of create a little a bar here, and because it's a little bit trickier to do, I'm going to expand it and make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and I'm going to say I want everything to end here, and I'm going to work my way backwards. So, and I'm actually going to, instead of a straight line, let's kind of a diagonal line. So here's where the L is going to be. Let's write L, O, H, R, A, W. And then, so we kind of want the W there, put a little space, Y, D, N, A. So we're going to try to fit this text into these areas here. So, okay, let's try here and okay, kind of the spacing is a little bit funny here, so if I'm not happy with it, I can also make any changes. I can get rid of that line that was below and a little bit of this. Okay, so if I've got this on the page here, I'm also now just going to go lightly over and erase a bunch here. So not pressing quite as hard as I did originally. And some of you are like, the whole image is disappearing. Well, I can also erase most of it and then draw some back to help me find that image again. think that's pretty good, right? So we're gonna put some white down. Or we're gonna put some yellow down, and then I'm just gonna go over any areas here to clean that up a bit. So I'm just gonna go back over some of these lines. Okay, so let's tackle this painting. Well, you know, now that I'm looking at the painting, we've got the cool yellow. I might actually add a little bit of warm yellow to this mixture. So put a little bit of cool yellow on the palette. And I'm also going to put a little bit of the warm yellow into it. And then we're going to grab a paintbrush. Maybe that's a little bit big. I think that one's okay. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this warm yellow and some cool yellow. Let's get a lot more of the cool yellow and just a little mixed together. It's a subtle kind of change. It's not quite as kind of lemony yellow as this, and it's not quite as orangey as that. So it's a little bit like a happy medium in between here. The yellow paint in general tends to be relatively transparent, so it should work pretty well to be able to see any pencil lines should be able to kind of come through. So I'm just going to brush all this in. One of the features of this painting is you can see on the image on the screen to the left there that it kind of goes a little bit outside the lines, right? So it's not as if just the black lines go right up to the edge of the color. They're just sort of a little bit of a halo of yellow around the edge. So you can either paint right up to that line. We can cover it with a little bit of white as well, or you can just, when you're painting this, kind of shrink your image just a little bit. Okay, that's pretty good. So now I'm going to apply some white paint on here. And you're probably asking, well, why do the background's white already? Why do I want? Well, the background is this white gesso, which is fine. It also has a few of my fingerprints all over it. And if I do want to do any kind of cleaning up of edges, let's say I make some mistakes at some part, if I try to clean that up with white paint, right? If I try to go around and put white paint in some of these areas, it's going to stick out. It's not going to be the same as the gesso in behind, because they're going to be slightly different shades of white or tints of white. So it's going to draw attention to itself. It's going to sort of look like, you know, whiteout on a piece of paper. You know, if you've typed, or if you've ever used a typewriter and you've used a little bit of whiteout somewhere. I don't even know if you can still buy whiteout anymore. Does anybody use whiteout anymore? I'm aging myself a little bit. But you know how you can always sort of see where the whiteout is right? If you're looking at the original piece of paper. So generally in a painting you kind of want to hide your mistakes a little bit, or where that whiteout is going to go. So that's why I'm going to get rid of that, put some white in the background. So just cleaning that brush off. Grab my white paint. Okay. And then let's go back here. Grab a white brush. Or not a white brush, just a brush for my white paint. And I don't know if you can already see, there's just a tiny bit of a difference in the quality of this paint. Not only because it's also kind of filling in some of the weave of the canvas a little bit as well. So the other thing I got to be a little bit careful of is this yellow paint is fresh. I literally painted it, you know, what, a minute ago. So it's still quite wet. So I want to be careful about getting my paintbrush right up to that line, because I could potentially drag some of that yellow paint into my paint. So just going to be a little bit careful here. I got shadows going right across the picture. Here we go. And again, once I've got this kind of layer of white in here, it will be no problem for later on when things dry to go in and even touch this up even more. Just put a lot of paint right there. I'm also going to go right over top of the signature I put down here, and that it should kind of show through. Maybe not immediately. Some of you might be panicking because it disappeared. As the paint dries, it should become a little bit more visible again. And you know, if it's a little bit hard to see, well, that's kind of part of the goal, is we kind of want that original layer to kind of hide our original kind of sketching over there. When we're done this, we're going to set it aside, and we'll do the carbon paper version. I know there's probably some of you who are sitting here waiting, like, I got the carbon paper version. I want to wait. I want to do that version of this paint. Well, have no fear. We're about to, in about 30 seconds here, we're going to begin it. So I'll show you how that process works. And for anyone who doesn't have carbon paper, you might want to stick around and kind of just watch, because this might inspire you to go out and go get some, so that you can use this for future projects or any of our future classes. You could go, if you're really kind of unhappy with the drawing aspect of your painting, then a little bit of carbon paper could really help you. So I'm just gonna show you what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of looking at the painting from an angle, and I can see where the wet paint is if I want to really try to get close to this shape here. There's a few places that didn't have any paint at all. And again, I can go over this later and really kind of make these nice sharp edges if I want. Okay. So that's good. We're going to let this dry before I paint any of the black on there, but I think this is ready to go here. So I'm going to move that to the down here to dry. I'm going to clean my brush off, and we'll start the whole process again, but using the carbon paper. And I'm Also just cleaning off these brushes a little bit so that when I use them again, they're going to be nice and fresh and ready to go. Before I forget, on Saturday, this Saturday, in just a few days from now, I am going to do a special episode where I look at your artwork and give you feedback on your artwork, and also celebrate all of the amazing artwork that you guys have been making. I've gotten a lot of emails over just the past few days through Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, people texting me or sending me these things. So I'm really excited to show you guys. There's some amazing things that you guys have done. And also, a few of you have gone back and done previous paintings again a second time, now that you've had a little bit of experience, and the results are astounding, absolutely astounding. So I'm really excited to show you like what happens when you do that, when you go back and rework one of your older paintings. Anyway, okay. So I've got these printouts of the banana, and you can see, let's kind of this one here. So you can see these images. Here's, you know, my printer, which hasn't been used in a year or more, or I don't know when was the last time I printed something on this printer. I just use it for scanning. But anyway, it's got some lines on it. Here was the first one. Looks great. And then as we go, it slowly degrades, but it doesn't matter what this looks like. I'm just going to use it as a template. I've also made it, I shrunk it down, and this is also in that Dropbox link if you wanted to use a smaller canvas. So I could use these smaller canvases. I've also gessoed these, and these are ready to go. So this would be potentially, I think though I might do, well, the reason why I was going to do some small ones is just to do a quick little test, actually. That's so I could show you. I'm like, why did I do these again? So I could show you a few different processes, because we're going to try making our own graphite paper here. All right, I gessoed this about an hour ago, nice and dry already, ready to go. So okay, so let's as I said, I've got this paper here is kind of, it's a thicker sketchbook paper, which will work fine, but I'm curious. The thinner, the reason why nice thin paper works really well is what I'm going to be doing is tracing over this image, and the thinner the paper, the more likely that those lines are going to transfer onto the other surface, right? Which is why, if you remember those old credit card machines, and you got your receipt back, the one that you signed, like it was on this super flimsy, thin, like almost like rice paper kind of material, right? So that the signature could transfer through, was it 3 layers? Okay, so I'm gonna get a pair of scissors here. Just gonna cut this in half. So I'm gonna show you, let's do a version that we're going to make entirely our own. So, we're going to make our own graphite paper. We'll see how well this works. I've seen people demonstrate this before. I've never actually done it myself, but I can't see why it should work. So what I've got here are graphite sticks. I wonder if these, I can't remember how dark these graphite sticks are. These, if you've seen the videos where I'm making drawings in a fighter plane, which, yeah, I made a whole bunch of art while flying around at the speed of sound. These are some of the tools that I used in the airplane, in the fighter jet plane. so that I wrapped them with this duct tape so that my fingers wouldn't get too dirty. And I also liked them because they're nice and thick, because I had to wear these big gloves in the fighter plane. So they're kind of they're easier to hold when you got big thick gloves than a tiny little pencil. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pencil, and on the other side of the paper, I'm going to really cover it really well with graphite. And I want to just make sure everything is there, so I'm kind of holding it up to the light. Maybe can you see that on the screen there, right? You can see the light coming through. There's a little bit here I haven't gotten with the signature. Now, I don't need to go all the way up to the edge if there's nothing there to do. Looks again, maybe just a little bit right, where was that, right here? And I really want to make sure I've got lots of charcoal. Like, I want to be able to go like this and be able to scoop a little bit off on my fingers. So I'm just going to go back over this whole thing. And really make sure I've got nice and covered here. So the moment of truth. I'm going to put this on here, and then I'm going to trace it. Now, before I do that, I want to do a couple of things. One of which, was I smart enough to include any tape on here when I was prepping? I was not smart enough to bring tape. Can I reach and grab my tape from where I'm standing? Let me see how long my microphone. Give me 1 second. Let's see if I can reach all the way back in here. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to unplug this. So, give me 1 second. I'm going to mute my microphone while I grab some. Go. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tape this down. So, what I want to do is I'm going to put a little bit of tape, because I don't want it to move when I'm doing this tracing, because once it moves, it's lining it up, trust me, is really, really difficult. So, let's put a little bit of tape up here and here. You know, you could spend a lot of time trying to get this level if you want. Okay, and again, I'm going to put some white here, white paint to clean up that background when I'm done. So, that's ready. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, you can use a pen or a pencil, but I'm going to suggest you also think about using one that's got some color in it. Let's see. If there's one thing I have lots of, it's art tools. So you can use, let's say, a red pen or a red pencil, just because you want to be able to see what lines you've already drawn. You don't want to be sitting there like, what have I done? Because if I use a black pencil or black pen, I could get all the way done and realize I did Andy War, miss the end, and then you got to kind of go back and try to find it. So let's just make sure this pencil or pen works. It's a little bit. Its better days are behind it here. I'm sure I've got 5 red pencils, probably, or pens in here. Let's see. I haven't used some of these pens again in years. I probably should just throw them all out, but let's use a pencil. Although I'm afraid that the good thing about using a pen, actually, I think I might actually use the pen, is that I can press a little bit harder than I might with that pencil. So let's just see here. Let's do a little test with the L. Look at that. Boom. Right, so I know that it's working. I know that, so this process will work. I'm just going to put a little bit of tape down. This is just going to help keep it from moving around. Just going to turn those flaps so they don't catch. And then it's just a matter of tracing this all out. I also want to try to avoid doing much pressing here so that I don't get too many fingerprints all over this thing. I don't have to worry about getting absolutely every tiny little detail in here because I'm going to be painting over all of it. So I'm just trying to get the basic composition in place here. This is why even if you have an old printer that barely works like mine, you can still do this even when it's got all these banding and stripes because it's running out of ink or it's clogged, because it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, this thing can just go in the trash right afterwards. Okay, here was that black line going up here. If you want, you can really get into the details. If you really wanted to reproduce this totally with complete fidelity, you could go in and draw every little dot and line. Okay. So I think everything is there. Again, you can, what's good about having a different colors, I can kind of look around and I can see, you know, because often what happens is it's like something like this. So I might forget to draw that line or something, or I forget to draw this line. And then you peel the tape off, as I'm about to do here, and you go, oh no! All right, so look at that. Isn't that cool? Homemade graphite paper. And you don't have to use these special graphite pencils that I used. In fact, maybe the next, when I do the soup can, I can just use a regular pencil to do that. Right, so here's the original. I don't know if you can see when I kind of shine kind of the embossing that's come through there. And I could use this again. I could make another version of it. Right? It's probably exactly where those lines might be a little bit. I could just take my pencil and just go back over these lines all over again and kind of recharge it so that if I did want to go back over, although there's more charcoal or graphite on those lines, right? So this is ready to go again, and I can make another copy. I could do 50 of them, and I could give these away to friends for Christmas. Hint, hint, right? Right around the big holiday coming up around the corner here. Okay, so let's get this painting ready to go. Right, it's just a small one. So just cleaning my area up a little bit here, and let's get this up here. I might as well just zoom in a bit. Okay, and we're going to repeat this same process of transferring some of these paints onto this surface. So I gotta just do, oops, let me move this over for a second here. Remember, I'm using the warm yellow and cool yellow to mix together. Scoop some of that, let's do this together. The warm yellow is a little bit more opaque than the cool yellow is, so it won't surprise me. You could see it maybe looks a little bit more like the warm color than it does the yellow color. One thing to think about is this may smudge a little bit as I paint on it, but I'm just going to paint right over top of this. See, I'm kind of going around, leaving a bit of a halo effect, all of which I can clean up later as I go. And of course the original here also has a bit of a yellow halo around it too, so it's, you could make this yellow halo be quite wide. It's totally up to you, however you want to approach this. I also want to avoid going sort of back and forth over top of this, because then that's really going to start scrubbing the paint off of the background. Great. Just making sure I got a nice little even halo around this whole thing. Okay. Oh, I'm going to put some white paint on there as well. Just going to clean this brush. So now I'm just going to get some more white paint on here. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly layer this all over here. So after this, I think what I'll do is I'll show you how to do the soup can using the graphite paper. Since I haven't opened up that, and you can kind of see how it works. I mean, it works pretty much just like the graphite, the handmade graphite paper we used, but maybe slightly different. So I'll just show you how that works. Again, I'm just painting right over that graphite lines, but they'll show through here. This is a smaller painting, so it's a little bit trickier to do that handwriting with, but we'll do our best, and even if it looks a little bit off, that's okay. you know, there's some areas here where I cut in a little bit close with my paintbrush. I'm actually surprised I didn't get any yellow on my paintbrush, but I'm not too worried about that. You can see the name disappeared, but even as it's drying right now, I can see it's starting to come back a little bit. So again, I'm going to quickly wash my brush. Now, if you want to, if you're ready, you know, this is dry, you could immediately start painting the black on top of this. Mine is still very much wet. Even this one still looks pretty wet, so I'm going to keep it, let it dry, and I'm going to move on to the other painting here. I'm just brushing that just so all that white paint dries and it doesn't get all over anything else. Okay. So this one, I'm going to make a life-size, or not life-size, a full-sized version of this painting. And there's a little, I don't know what that is, a little bit of paint or a dead bug that got caught in there and met an ugly fate. So you can see there's a few different, also I might as well show you a few different prints that I've made here. Let's back that out. The first time I printed it, I don't know what was wrong with my printer, but a lot of the details didn't come out. I tried it again, I actually darkened the image, and then I did it again. So who knows how your printer fares. So the first thing I want to do is I want to see how this fits on the page. So this, if I do it like this, and I peel that off, right, there's going to be a big gap. Let me see, back this out even more. Okay, right here. So if I put this down right here, just this big space at the bottom that I don't really want or need. Depending on your printer, it might be a little bit skewed to one side. So it's worth just taking a second here, because where this image, where I put this is where it's going to be on the canvas. So, you know, you can even, you know, I like kind of just, rather than using a ruler, just my pencil. So if I go up here, I go, okay, that's that length, and I go down here. Let me see. I feel like I could bring this up a little bit. Okay, it's always, you tend to kind of want a little bit more space at the bottom than you do at the top, so it's always kind of nice to just kind of double check here. Let's see, I think I still need to go up a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so if I've got this in place, now let's just check the sides so it's nice and centered in the middle. Pretty good. Right, and you want to make sure it's not crooked or anything like that. I'm going to now tape it down. So I want this so that nothing happens. It's not going to move or shift, because especially the more complicated the image is, if you bump it or move it, like there's some people who don't put any tape down and they're pretty confident about it, but you know, I'm telling you, if it moves, it's just like you might as well start all over, because you'll never get them to line up again. Okay, so here's this package. You know, different brands are they're gonna look a little bit different inside here. Okay, so you can see this is very similar. Where did my previous sheet of? Right, this is basically just like this. but the whole thing is really well covered. So if we move that out of the way, first thing I can go, does it actually cover this whole image? In this case it does, so that's actually pretty good. You know, if it didn't, I might have to tape a couple pieces together, or I could do half of it and then just move this down. But in this case it looks like it's perfect fit, so I'm going to take it and put it under here. Now, the thing with the graphite paper is the graphite paper, if it moves and it gets jarred around, that's not a problem. It doesn't matter if it gets moved, because, you know, I could move this 10 times. In fact, maybe I'll do that just so you can see it's this image in relationship to the background, right? So it doesn't really matter if this gets shifted around. I mean, obviously I don't want it to move too much because it could create some smudging on the back on that surface, but I think I'm ready to go. And again, I'm just going to put a little bit more tape down here. Oh, you know, even I just looking at this think, well, this might need to go up a little bit higher. Okay. So put that there. I could trim this down if I wanted to. So this is a little bit of can be a time-consuming process, but it certainly is faster than eyeballing this whole thing, right? So I'm going to, let's say, start up here. And again, you could use the pen that you use could be totally dead, right? It doesn't actually matter what this pen looks like. It doesn't have to have any ink in it whatsoever, because we're just, you know, pressing down through these layers. Alright, so I'm going to draw here for maybe a couple of minutes, and then I'll peel it off just to see what the progress is. And, you know, you can use this exact same process of using carbon paper or making your own carbon paper to transfer your own drawings onto canvas. So if you want to make a painting of your dog or your house, and the idea of trying to draw it out onto a canvas and all of the potential errors that could happen during that process causes you to stay up at night. Well, using the carbon paper like this is a great solution to help kind of skip over that whole process entirely. Warhol himself, when he made this image originally, I think he used an overhead projector. You know, again, this is another technology that is, I don't know if it's totally obsolete, but anyone of kind of my age or older probably remembers them being used in school all of the time. I still do workshops and things in schools around, and I see them in classrooms sometime, but I don't know how often they get used, because a lot of the stuff now people just hook up their computer to a video projector and project onto the screen. Okay, so let's just take a quick look and see how well we've done so far. And again, I can take this, I can move this out of the way, and voila, I've got this image. Now it's a little bit tricky. So what I've done, you can see here, it's transferred an image onto this side as well. And you can see that when I'm outlining these lines, especially the thicker lines, I'm making a one on either side. Right, so I'm not just doing one line, I'm kind of going in and out. So here now, I don't have to worry about lining this up exactly. You could recycle your graphite paper over and over and over again. Just something to keep in mind, And in fact, I'll do this is, let's say I'll move this down here. Let's see how many lines. If I go over top of lines I've already drawn, there's just not going to be as much or any of the graphite coming through. So, but I'll just kind of show you what that looks like as we go here. It's a good, like I was just doing a quick little check. I want to make sure there was actually graphite paper underneath the image, because trust me, I've used this graphite paper in my artwork many times, and there have been times where you spend like 20 minutes doing all this tracing, and then you flip and you're like, oh, there's no tracing paper under, you've done all this, like you just spend all this time drawing over top of a photocopy or something. And you can see these fleur-de-lis here. I think these were actually stamps that he stamped onto the surface here. So if you wanted to make a stamp, or you had a fleur-de-lis stamp, you could just put those in place of painting it. I was even contemplating today, maybe should we make like a simple potato stamp to do this? Like, I think showing people graphite paper, and this lesson was already maybe complicated enough, or has enough steps that might be a little unnecessary. And, you know, as I'm doing this, I'm realizing this probably, I won't have time to do the eyeball version of this painting. Because it would probably take a little bit of time. But well, we'll see. Towards the end, I'm happy kind of sticking around a little bit, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think how we would go about that would, you know, there's many of you have kind of seen me demonstrate that process a number of times, so I used to use graphite paper all of the time. I did a project. I was a student at Cooper Union in New York in the late 1990s. Cooper Union, again, was the school that Alex Katz went to, or the artist that I featured in the previous episode to this. And when I was a student at Cooper, I spent the entire time tracing comic books. In fact, I have it somewhere around here. I had this great big sketchbook, great big, this really nice sketchbook that I bought at an art supply store there. That was like the size of like a portfolio case, and I would just go to a library and sit in the library and be just tracing comics. And then I was telling them that my goal, I had a class, I remember saying to them, my goal would be to trace the entire New York City phone book, and the students were just like outraged. They're just like, this is crazy, like what a waste of time. Like it was like a kind of very Warhol moment where people were still to this day, the idea of reproducing something, you know, mundane like a soup can or the phone book is, you know, can bring out some emotions in people. I never did. I did one page of the phone book, and realized that this was going to be a long process that was probably not going to be very forgiving. There didn't seem like there was going to be a lot of an art project that would be appreciated or be really worth my time. So I abandoned it, and I'd probably still be working on it 20 years later, to be honest. But, you know, it goes to show that you can still shock people, and you don't have to shock people with, you know, like outrageous acts of like violence or content, you know, that just doing something like tracing an image is like is really upsetting to some people. Some people, you know, the idea of artists using methods to trace images onto a canvas is very controversial. I have a book on my shelf back here by David Hockney, and you recall we did a painting of David Hockney's dogs a few weeks ago. And David Hockney, this book, what is it? It's called The Secret Knowledge. And there's a, I think it was a Channel 4 BBC in England made a documentary that kind of came out around the same time as the book. And this, the idea, the kind of the thesis that he puts forward, and the actual name of the thesis is the Hockney-Falco thesis, is because it's he collaborated with an academic who helped him write the book and author the academic paper that was published in, you know, reputable journals. Is that many artists, some of the most famous artists, used various different methods to transfer images onto canvas. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here, I'm not sure, it probably doesn't show up very well on the black, but you recall I did move the tracing or the graphite paper down a little bit, and so I drew over top of lines I already drew, and we'll see how well that came across. Alright, so this was the area that I went over twice, and to be honest, I can't really see any difference there. It looks pretty good. And you know what? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another banana picture using the graphite paper as well. It's the same size as this one. I'm going to do that really quickly, maybe while some other people are still finishing up their images. Let's see, where's my other banana, the big banana? There we are. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. Let's position this on the canvas, and then where's my tape? So I gotta think about how it fits on here. That looks pretty good. Does it look kind of straight? And I'm just going to recycle this again so you can see that I can get quite a number of images out of this simple sheet here. So make sure everything will fit on here. Looks good. Okay, and this one I can go over pretty quickly. So this is kind of a cheap and dirty way of making multiple versions of the exact same painting. So again, you know, there's many people who make things to give as gifts for the holidays, and making your own painting and then reproducing it. You know, there's many different ways to reproduce a picture. You could make prints of it. You could make them prints on your computer, or giclée prints, which are like a computer print onto canvas. And you can, there's various different companies that you can provide an image to, and then they'll make the image and mail it back to you. So you could create your own print. You could make a painting and then take a photograph of it, and then make as many prints as you want. There's people that do print on demand of giclée prints. But you could also do this process and actually have, you know, original paintings with, you know, actual paint on it that aren't. So each painting would be slightly different versions, but rather than a computer printout of your painting on a canvas, you would have an actual original, like, hand-painted image, which would be really interesting. To think about, like, what would this constitute? If you did that, is it still an original, or is it a copy? Good question. I mean, those are things for your art gallery owner or your curator or critic to historian to argue about. I think as artists, it's just like, just do it. Who cares? And let the historians and stuff sort it all out. Okay, so there, a nice quick illustration. Boom. Transferred on here, and what that took me a couple of minutes, and I've got that done. And I think if you look at the drawings of Andy Warhol, you'll see that you'll see this particular kind of style come through in the drawing that is very reminiscent of this tracing method. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of the same, since I got all this paint here, let's just do this again really quickly for the third time. Oh, that's maybe too much paint, but scoop. Okay, we'll cover this surface here really quick. Again, getting this little bit of a halo around. And it doesn't have to be yellow. You could make this a green banana, an orange banana, a blue banana, pink banana. You could make as many different colors as you want. You could do Christmas-themed bananas, green and red, and you could do a Valentine's Day version of this. You know, like, the sky's the limit. You know, I think that's what's kind of exciting, and that's one of the things that Warhol himself kind of really jumped on is this idea of customizing paintings and making like oh, you want a painting that fits your couch, but you don't like any of the paintings that I have. Well, I can make any of these paintings in this gallery, whatever color you like. Just pick a color and give me a couple days and I'll crank it out. Right? He was a businessman, right? He really, and there's lots of quotes by Warhol on business, and I think he was a very, very shrewd, intelligent guy, and certainly made a lot of money too making his art. And anyway, he was a fascinating character. So let's quickly apply some paint on here on the white in the background. Got a little bit of yellow on my brush, so that's being spread around, but I'm not too concerned about that. I kind of like having rather than just a plain solid color, I like having some variety in there. Sometimes it happens accidentally, and just forcing me to roll with the punches here. The other thing that's cool too about using that graphite paper is you can cut the shapes out and you can move them and reposition them. Let's say I could take that Andy Warhol, I could blow it up and move it, or I could get rid of it. I could put my name there. I could put anything there. I could change it and say Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah or Happy Kwanzaa or whatever you want to put on there. And I could change this from a banana into an apple and make it look like a Warhol painting. I could still put his name on there. I think he would find that very funny. He was certainly somebody who questioned the whole idea of authorship. He had this thing he called the factory, his studio. And he would get his assistants. He would get some kids off the street, and he'd pay them $100 and say, "Here, can you make some paintings for me? I'm going to go out to a party and celebrate with some friends." And they would make all the paintings, and then he'd just come back and sign them. And he wouldn't hide that fact. He would say proudly, "Oh yeah, no, these paintings were made by a couple of kids I hired and people would be, oh my goodness," which sounds outrageous, but the fact is that most artists who are some of the famous artists have studio assistants, and the line between what they did and what the artist did, it can be often very blurry. So actually let's just see what this looks like with these other two here. Fit them on the screen at the same time. My plant out of the way here, right? So we've got a bunch of the same image repeated a few times here. So obviously this is the first one I did where I eyeballed it. The second one I did using the hand-made graphite paper, and this one that I just did right now. And pursuing this potentially dangerous thing of trying to get this little speck of something out here. Ay, ay, ay. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I think these ones are ready to go. This one's going to need to dry, so I'll put it aside. Now let's get some black paint. We're going to finish these, then I'm going to work on the Campbell soup can, and then that other one I just began should be dry by then. So I'm just going to keep on painting for a while this afternoon, and just looking at some of the comments. Jean says, this is a fun painting. May says, I have the graphite paper and only want to do the 2 paintings, not 4. Does it mean the first half of the class is not relevant for me? Can you do the, let me see, where is this? Can you do the graphite one of the banana right after you do the drawing freehand? Bay Color says, I've seen Andy's artworks at MoMA in New York City. And Bay Colors, did you repeat this video again and again? The banana, yes, this is the 3rd time I've painted it. Yeah, it's a very Warholian experience of seeing the same thing repeated many times. Which view do I want? Here. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint these black lines on top of my image. And you want a paintbrush that, where's my paintbrushes? Oh, they fell back over here. You want a fairly small paintbrush because we're going to be getting into the details. So it's up to you as to which one you want to use. You could certainly get away with a larger paintbrush, and you could be a little bit, you know, you don't have to, it's up to you how accurate you want to make it, right? If you really want it to be like a bang-on super copy of it, then you can, it's just going to take you some time, and you can kind of, you know, go at your own pace. And but you know, some of, I don't know if how many people are like locked into the idea of doing that. So you can go a little bit faster and as you produce this, just organizing myself, all this stuff all over the place. So let's see. Let's get a little bit of paint on here. You can see I haven't put much black paint on. Just, I mean, even less than I use for anything else. Because the black paint, I always find, tends to dry out faster than any other color. And I want it to be as fluid as possible when I'm painting, and as kind of, and as wet of a paint as possible. So rather than putting a big glob of paint on there, I'm just going to, okay, let's paint this little one first. I think that might be most satisfying for people to see. And then I'll come back and do the freehand one in a second here. So, I'm gonna get some paint on my brush. I'm gonna save the signature. Well, the signature might be a little bit tricky. I might have to turn the canvas. So actually, you know what? I'm going to try to do some of the signature first. So this is also another reason why having a gessoed canvas is really helpful, because if I tried to do this on a canvas that was still very rough, it could be really kind of a pain, because all of these kind of bumps and grooves in the weave of the canvas. where the paintbrush kind of goes in these little valleys could drive me absolutely nuts. So, you know, especially doing somebody's signature here, everyone's got their own way of signing something, and how much time are you going to spend trying to knock this out of the park? I don't know. I'm not personally committed to spending like an hour doing this little detail, but I went a little bit easier than I thought it was. I thought I might have to be moving the canvas around, so that's why I did here first, because if I had to do this kind of thing, I was afraid I might be getting my hand onto the canvas. So now it's just a matter of kind of tracing over some of these lines. So let's just kind of taking a look at the original. Okay, this is all kind of black in here. You know, as I said, I am a big fan of Andy Warhol. I think, I feel like he you know, he came from a background where he was this little kid from Pittsburgh who was, you know, he was not a particularly handsome kid, and I think he got bullied and pushed around a lot when he was young. You know, he was gay at a time when that was, especially from a working class town like Pittsburgh, was, you know, something that could get you killed. So he had a lot of difficulties fitting in and finding friends, and he spent a lot of time by himself and a lot of time watching movies and watching television with his mom. He was really close with his mom. He lived for many years, even after he became a huge celebrity, in an apartment in New York City with his mom, and he would, you know, go out and do these big crazy parties at Studio 54, and then he would come home and his mom would be there, and they'd, you know, have tea and have breakfast together, and then he'd go off and hang out with Truman Capote and Mick Jagger, and but you know, I think he really saw pop culture as having like this really important value for him. Is that was sort of like his company. That was those were the people on the screen were his friends when he didn't have any, and so I think he felt like a really intense personal connection to them, and I think it disgusted him how like dismissive, you know, the hoity-toity people were about all that. Like, oh, like they no one would want to admit that they saw the latest James Cagney film or Errol Flynn. Like, that was kind of just, you know, trashy entertainment for the poor people. Right, like the real intelligent people would go to the opera, and they would, you know, go and listen to the latest reading by Norman Mailer, and, you know, although he himself, you know, that's not the best comparison, but other authors at the time, you know, it was always about like showing your your taste showed kind of your education, and if you wanted to kind of fit in high society, there were certain books you have to read, and you'd have to be like a big fan of Shakespeare and be able to recite poems by Byron and Keats, and if you didn't, then it was kind of a pretty, you could make somebody out for having a public school education real quick, you know, like, oh, it's not a Harvard man there. And he never went to any of those big schools. He didn't have that kind of a background, and I think he really resented that. Like he became very famous as an illustrator and highly in demand, and started going to those parties. But I think even when he was at those parties, he felt like, I don't really belong here because I don't have the pedigree all these people have, and they probably laughed at him afterwards, like, oh, that guy's a brilliant drawer, but, you know, I wouldn't invite him to my cottage in the summer because how embarrassing would it be to have this, you know, poor guy from the other side of the tracks there. We wouldn't be able to carry on a proper conversation. And so I think he always, that's one reason why he became, like, a lot of the people that hung out with him at his factory, his studio, were kind of like street kids, and you know the people that had been rejected by society. So a lot of the early Warhol celebrities and the people that were in his movies, which I'll talk about in a second, were definitely not the same kind of people that would make it into a Hollywood film. Like Cary Grant would not have made it into a Warhol film. Like he just... So what I think is really interesting about Warhol, long story short, is how he transcended those ideas of taste and then made it like really cool for, you know, at a certain point, all of those really rich people were begging to come into the factory and to hang out, and even though they'd be sitting next to some street kid or you know, people of, you know, he was gay himself, but you know, again at a time where it wasn't particularly, certainly could get you thrown in jail at the very least, if not like your career would be destroyed. So you'd eventually had all these, you know, Rockefellers and Guggenheims and the high society of New York would be hanging out at a studio, and if you wanted to be seen, you'd be at the factory. And I think that really helped kind of change public perception towards LGBT people, because they saw them and they hung out with them and they were, oh, these people aren't some sort of like aliens from outer space who are destroying the world. They're just people like us. And I had a really nice conversation with one of them the other night, and and you know, you start having all these very wealthy people who donate to political causes, and they start to kind of maybe channel their money to supporting people that weren't kind of so close-minded, I guess. Okay, and you can see as I'm kind of finishing up this one here, you know, I can kind of add these little dots and be a little bit loose with how I paint this. Try to get in this look of the screen print. Okay. So I think that one is done. Can't really think of how much more I want to do to this. pretty happy with the way this one looks. It's a smaller painting than the others. But, okay. I think what I'm going to do right now, just because I'm looking at the time, I'm going to put a little bit of time into my soup can. And then I'll come back to the other bananas and work on those with the remaining time here. So, let's move. I'll keep that out here for a second while that's on the screen. Clean my brush off here. Especially with these small brushes, it's really important to wash them kind of the sooner the better, because it doesn't take very much for a little brush like that to seize up if it's got some paint in it. And the paint sometimes gets right, where is my, before I drip paint all over any paint, you know, gets right up in here, the ferrule here, this metal band, and you know, you really want to try to get as much of the paint out of there as possible. Okay, that's cool. I feel pretty happy with that little painting. And like, how long did that take us? What, the tracing itself took maybe 5-6 minutes. Putting the yellow and white paint took, I don't know, 3 minutes. And then the painting afterwards took another 10-20 minutes, right? So in half an hour we have a finished painting, right? It's certainly not the most complex painting, but I would be happy to have this on the wall of my house, and I'd be happy to give this to somebody as a Christmas gift or birthday gift or whatever. So that feels really good. A nice quick little painting. This one's going to take us a little bit more time because there's a lot more lines on it here. But again, I think it'll come together pretty quickly. So, cue up the image. And let's take a look at the original here. Okay, so looking at this, we are going to use some warm red for the, obviously, the top of the soup can for tomato. And you could choose any kind of flavor of soup you wanted for this. You don't have to use the tomato. That's just, I love tomato soup. That's probably my favorite soup is tomato soup. So that's why I chose that. But he did, I think that there was 29 or something around that, different soup cans, one for every flavor of soup that Campbell's made at the time. So in order to appeal to as many different people as possible, right? So again, I thought that was really funny that instead of making 30 tomato soups, he made one for everybody, right? Then there is this kind of supposedly gold paint in here. Now, I do have some metallic gold paint that I could use for that. I could use some kind of fake gold paint to paint this, but I think it might be fun just to try to mix our own gold paint, because I'm sure very few of you have actual kind of metallic or iridescent colors with you. Again, you can buy them at an art supply store, but let's try to do this ourselves. So really, the main thing that we're going to paint is this red and then the gold. So how are we going to make those colors? The red, pretty self-explanatory. Well, let's do that first. We'll do one thing at a time here. And I'm going to use some warm red here. I don't want to put too much because I don't want to waste too much of this paint, but that should be enough. About as much as I put on my a little bit more than I put on my toothbrush. And Sue says, I like tomato too, but I like Heinz soup. I didn't actually know Heinz made their own soup. That's interesting. I mean, it makes sense. They make ketchup, so they're probably one of the big buyers of fresh tomatoes around the world. Anyway, so I'm going to paint this all red up here. I'm going to have to remember to leave a little gap here because this is where that gold is going to go. Red down here. I'm going to use a combination of a few brushes. I'm going to use a larger brush, and then I'm also going to use a little bit of a smaller brush. Or maybe that's a little too small. I'm going to use maybe these two so I can kind of get into some of these smaller places. And if I need, I got a smaller brush. All right, because I don't want to try to do this whole thing with a big brush because that's going to drive me crazy. Nor do I want to use a small brush because then I got all of this area to fill in. So let's tackle this right now. Sue says there's 57 varieties of Heinz soup. Huh. There you go. There you go. Now, I could mix a I actually think this red, the warm red that I have right out of the tube, is going to work fine. I think I'm going to put this down here. That's really nice. Okay. So I'll show you how I'm going to approach this. Okay. I'm going to get a little bit of this big area painted in. I'm going to put the brush down. And then I'm going to get my smaller brush and then come in here and start painting this right away. Because I don't want to have all, because what I want to do is I want to integrate this wet paint, this big area into the, I want to spread it out basically, so that I don't have these sharp areas of one big area it's dry and then another area that is, how do I explain it? I guess what I mean is that one thing sometimes people do is they do some really tight outlining, and then afterwards they go in and paint it with, so you end up having kind of this dried outline and then another piece of paint over top of it, and it just sort of, it looks like you can see the two different paint brushes and approaches there. So it's sort of like I'm trying to do little areas at a time while the paint is still wet. You can take your time doing all this. I'm probably going to move just a little bit faster than maybe some people, just because not only do I have a lot of experience doing this, but I think it's kind of self-explanatory what we're doing, so I don't know how many people, especially people who are waiting for me to get back to the banana. It's going to be a few minutes. I also, one thing I do like about this whole process is working on the same painting a few times like I did with the banana. Is kind of fun to see the different results and how they kind of change. Like even the two versions that I'm going to do here, one with the graphite paper and one with the handmade the paper that I made myself, are going to be slightly different. And I like that. I like that they're going to be not identical. And for all the contempt that Warhol accumulated over his career, he still was a big believer in the hand, in handmade things. People really think of him as just sort of grinding out all of these reproductions, and which he did, I think, but a lot of those were actually done. I think he also really believed in the democratization and the accessibility of art. He wanted to make art that everybody could own, and so he liked making prints that were on the cheaper end of things so that people could buy something and didn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an artwork by a living artist of his stature. So he made kind of some cheaper stuff. Obviously, he made really expensive things, some commissions, you know, but he would charge millions of dollars for. But you know, I don't begrudge him for that either. He was also very savvy in that he basically made like a painting of almost everything. So what's kind of funny is, you know, anytime you could, you know, there's these exhibitions on like the art of space, or the art of sport, or the art of whatever, motorcycles, or and you will see a painting of Andy Warhol's in there, because he made a painting of, you know, of all the major sports stars at the time, like Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan. And so, you know, they want to have an exhibition of art featuring or about sports. Well, Warhol did about 50 of those paintings. You want to have an exhibition on flowers? Well, he did lots of paintings of flowers, different kinds of flowers. You want to have one on, like, I mean, so, which I think is very funny, and, you know, like a shrewd business move, and a great way to kind of make sure that you're always included in the discussions, because, you know, like, he was somebody who was left out of every discussion when he was growing up. So, you know, if you want to have an exhibition, like here in Canada, that deals with anything related to sports, they're going to pull out that Warhol picture of Wayne Gretzky. I've seen that, you know, like, and you know, probably every art gallery in Canada had to have a copy of it, because, well, there's Wayne Gretzky. He's recognizable. That'll get people into the gallery. Even if they don't care about art, they know who Wayne Gretzky is. So, I just find that so funny. I apologize if my head gets in the way while I'm doing this. Sometimes I'll look up and see the screen like, oh, I wonder how long my head has been covering the painting for. So this kind of thing is a little bit time consuming, but it ultimately will pay off. You know, and using this process of transferring the image onto the canvas is going to result in, you know, the composition will look nice and clean. You know, even if it's a little bit clumsy, like even like the image you're looking at on the screen, or sorry, it's not on the screen, but let's say this one here, the original, you know, you could see that it's not made by a machine, even though he said at times he'd like to be a machine or a robot. There's still, you could see where, you know, on the bottom right corner there's some little splotches of paint and smudges, and which he could easily have painted over. I think he wanted it to look like it was painted, and this goes back to that idea of new realism, that as the French called it, when they named their version of pop art, that, you know, that he wanted to make things that looked real, like they were that this is a kind of a realism, that they were painted by hand, and in the same way that like a painter who's making a portrait of somebody, you know, might get a little bit of paint blobs here and there, so did his painting of a soup can get a few little extra blobs here and there. Okay. So I mentioned about Warhol right off at the very beginning about his films. When I was in graduate school in Los Angeles many years ago, I took a couple of classes on Andy Warhol that were entirely about Warhol. One was about the writings of Andy Warhol, because he published about 5 or 6 books, and I'm trying to remember which we read in class. And I also took another class on his films. If you're looking for a really great book, it's called Popism, like pop art, Popism, the Warhol 60s. It's called, and it's a book sort of talking about his experience during the 1960s, the celebrities that he met, the parties he went to, and it is very readable, right? You're probably like, oh yeah, that sounds really exciting. A book written by an artist, like, whew, that's going to be breezy reading, because, you know, I went to art school and read a lot of texts, and some of it is very dry. Warhol, however, his writings read like an issue of People magazine or something. You know, it's like the kind of stuff you can, like his approach to making art was that it could be very easily digestible, and it's, you know, it's all of the salacious details, all of the embarrassing things that no one would want. Well, he put it all in there, and it's you know, scandalous kind of book, but again, very easy to read. Like, you don't need a dictionary next to you to decipher what is being said. So that's a great book, Popism. I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to order a copy after class. Another book. What's another one? I think there was another one. It's like A to Z or something. The Philosophy of Warhol. I remember that being okay. I can't remember if it was a particularly great book or anything, but another book is The Diaries of Andy Warhol, which, if I recall, that was kind of the late 60s and 70s that book was written. I'm trying to remember if that was before or after he was shot, which is a whole other thing we can talk about while we work here. But that's also super interesting, because what he would do is he would wake up in the morning, and if I recall, this has been, again, 20 years ago since I took this class and read that book, but he would wake up every morning, and then he would call some assistant and leave a message, I think, in which he would dictate like the previous day's what he did the previous day, and then that person would type up his whatever he said, and then they eventually just put it in a book. There's no way Andy Warhol's sitting at a typewriter typing this stuff up. Like, he's, you know, on his way to something, or he's doing something, you know, making a phone call to get it over with. And it's pretty interesting. Again, there's some... See, I I think when done this, I'm going to get the white out and do a little. I should have put some white over all of this. But you live and learn. In fact, I may even stop this I might even just, let's see, I'll just finish this. And then put some white paint over all of this down here because I want to cover up a bunch. Up here, things are smudging around. Once I cover it with white paint, it's going to sort of lock in those pencil marks. So I think I'm going to do that. Let's wash these brushes off. It's going to slow down this process a bit, but upstairs. Did I tell you the great news of our daughter is now walking? She took her first steps the end of last week. I forgot to mention it on Tuesday, but she's walking around the house, and it's amazing how it's also changed her personality quite a lot too, because she seems so much more confident now that she's able to move around. And I've been thinking, we've been saying for months now, that any day now she's going to start walking, and then nothing. And she's got another friend that we have in our bubble that's been walking for at least a month, I think. And it's like, when is our daughter going to start walking? And then, boom, just one day, she's just, like, she's been able to stand and walk for a while, but she's been too afraid to do it. So she would, because there were times, where she would be holding on to something and then take her hand off, and we would see that she's just standing there all by herself, and then she would all kind of like snap back into reality. Oh my goodness, this whole time and she'd panic, grab onto something again. Or, when we're walking her around, she'd be barely holding onto your hand, but as soon as you try to, let go, she would panic and get very afraid of falling. But those days are behind us now. She is walking and walking, wants to explore, open every drawer, and it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit, now we're very conscious of how much baby-proofing our house needs, but wouldn't trade it for anything. So again, I'm putting this white paint down. I should have done that maybe even before I did anything else, but there's no instruction manual for what we're doing here. So I doing it now because that's also going to allow me, because if I want to clean this up right here, that little mistake, if I put just a little bit of white paint there, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. It's just going to, whereas if I put this white paint down, I can do as many touch-ups as I want, and the likelihood that those lines are going to come through and people will notice are very low. So yeah, I should have done that first, but live and learn. I also don't have to worry about getting I'm going to cover a lot of this with black. Oops. Yeah, there we go. Black paint shortly anyway. So I don't have to worry about going right up and over all of these lines, but it certainly won't hurt. So now that you see, by not having done this first, now I got to kind of outline some of this text, and boy, it's just a pain. So I may even avoid doing all of it, because unless I need to really get in here, it might not be worth my time. See, I should have done that up here, and then I would have been really nice to have cleaned up all of those pencil marks in there. Didn't even occur to me until I started painting down here. So, oh well. So let's get in here. I'm gonna do a little bit of touching up. This just slows everything right down. And this is probably one of those things that Warhol himself could have realized, you know, like after he made the first couple, like, oh, and he figured out like a assembly line like process in order to paint these, and then went and did it, and they got faster and faster as he worked on them. Okay. So again, there might be some touching up I gotta do in there afterwards, but you know, what am I gonna do? This is why having a few different paintings on the go is nice, because while this dries, I can go back to my bananas. Deborah says, ha ha ha, now you're in trouble. Yeah, oh yeah. You have a toddler now, so there's no rest for the wicked. Have fun with her. My husband and I relive those days with our grandkids. They are lovely times. It is. We are very lucky. We're very, very lucky. Our daughter is probably the easiest child. Maybe I shouldn't speak too soon, but she so far has been very, very easy for us. Goes to bed, sleeps all night long. Every once in a while she wakes up, but rarely does she do so. And you know, you do hear her complaining a little bit sometimes in the background, but otherwise we're very, very blessed for sure. Okay, so I'm just looking. I've got these two paintings side by side. The hand-drawn one that I did, and the one that I used the graphite paper for. So I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to paint this one first, because they're the same size. And this one, you know, some of the pencil lines have been obliterated a little bit, so I think it's just going to be a little bit easier for me to do this, and then I'll have this kind of almost as a template to work on this one. But obviously you could do either one first, but just since I'm probably going to be here for another hour working on these, I'm just looking for any kind of way to save myself a little bit of extra time. So after having done the previous one, I look at it and think, okay, I'm not so concerned about doing that signature first. So I think I can go right into the painting. Where's this? Here. Okay. So it's going to be a little bit different than the smaller version, just because I can see more details, or I can paint more details more easily. So some areas that previously were just a big blob of black, I can go in and really take care of and add a little bit more spice to it. if I want, I could keep it pretty simple, and to be honest, I probably will, just considering where I am with the time. Oh yeah, so what's another Warhol book I read? There's one. There's trying to remember. There was one. Oh, you know what it's called? It's called a novel, like the letter A novel, and that one is maybe not one I would recommend, except to like the hardiest or the most ardent Warhol fans. I did read it, but it's the way that it's written. So basically, him and a number of his friends would walk around with a cassette tape recorder and would record their conversations. And then what he did is he got a bunch of like college kids from some local university to transcribe these conversations. And I think he had like 5 or 6 students transcribing these conversations, and he gave them little to no instruction on how he wanted them done. And so the transcriptions are vary widely. Some of them, are pretty miserable transcriptions, and some of them are better than others. And so it's a little bit hard to follow. Like he could have hired professionals to do it, and he could have hired an editor to go and clean it up and make it more comprehensible, but he didn't. And I think, because again, part of his whole kind of thing was he liked sort of the rawness of it. And as a art project, I think it is kind of fascinating. Do I think most people would find it an enjoyable read? Probably not. I don't think most people would want to sit down, because it is like this. There's all sorts of bizarre spelling mistakes. The same person, like it's kind of hard to follow who's talking at different times. So it's a bit of a hot mess. But yeah, so if you're really into Warhol, you'd probably enjoy it and find it kind of funny. Warhol himself didn't, if I recall, didn't really do a lot of talking on those tapes, so it was some of the kind of wild characters he surrounded himself with, which is another thing. Like I think he was a quite deep thinker, but he liked to think of himself as a voyeur and somebody who hung out with really interesting people, kind of crazy, wild people, great talkers, and people who would take all sorts of crazy risks. And I think he enjoyed being with those kind of characters and just sort of standing back and watching the chaos that would ensue. But he himself was often kind of quiet and just like on the margins, sort of watching or facilitating things. And so I don't remember that book being, a great summer vacation beach read. But Popism, however, is really good. I've recommended that to a number of people who've thoroughly enjoyed it, who were quite surprised, because I don't think many people really think of him as being a deep thinker or particularly great writer, you know, and he himself sort of went out of his way to cultivate this image as a person who is, you know, not particularly interested and a little bit aloof, and so that kind of, you know, obviously, you know, poisoned some people towards him in some respects. So, likewise, like his films. So, for instance, as I mentioned a few times, I would talk about it so I can spend lots of time here. The films of Andy Warhol are infamously boring, and like probably one of his most famous films is called Empire, which is a film. He pointed a camera at the Empire State Building in New York City and let it run, and the film lasts. It's often shown as a 24-hour film, but if I recall, the film itself actually loops, and so I think there's only maybe like 5 hours or so of footage of like I can't remember if it's sun setting or sunrise. I'm sure somebody could do a quick internet search and could find out more information than I can off the top of my head, my memory. So it's this film that sort of goes on, and it's there's nothing really happening except this building with, and there's, I think it's pointed at, I think it's a clock, the clock part of it, so it's the very top of the Empire State Building, and so there's very little happening because it's just, you know, you're seeing sort of like a live feed of this building and the time changing and the sun setting and the clouds. It's a black and white film, and every once in a while you'll see an art gallery will stage a screening of it and let people come in and sleep on the floor and watch the movie, and you know, they'll have popcorn and stuff, and they'll screen it for 24 hours. And you know, on the face of it, it's totally absurd. Like, who would go sit in a movie theater for not even 24 hours, for an hour or half an hour, 10 minutes, and just look at a building on the movie screen? Like, that just seems like the most ridiculous, complete and utter waste of a person's time. And, you know, I agree, like, or at least I thought so at first before I took that course. And then I realized, like, one of the main conversations we had in that class over and over, this is our teacher is a writer named Bruce Hanley. You can look him up. He's a very well-known art writer, critic in Los Angeles. And I think even when we did that class, it got into the newspaper, like, can you believe some, you know, academic is doing a class on the films of Andy Warhol? Like, what garbage? Like, what are they teaching our children? But I thought it was one of the most interesting classes we ever took. The main thing that we talked a lot about was boredom, and the uses of boredom, and how so much of contemporary pop culture is about doing anything possible to keep your attention and to prevent the idea of boredom. Because if you get bored, you just turn the YouTube channel, you turn the television off, or you swipe right or left, right? Like, our tolerance for boredom these days is there's virtually none at all. People have no patience. And what I think is, you know, Warhol, one of his quotes is, I can't remember if it was before or after he made the film, but he said, you know, I want to be able to go to a movie and sit down and be able to get up halfway through and go to the bathroom and get some more popcorn and maybe go for a walk, have some dinner, and come back and not miss anything. Right? Which is totally absurd. But what I think, when I first heard that, I thought that was ridiculous. But then I started thinking about, movies and television shows and how think about those Transformers movies that came out. Was it Michael Bay or Jerry Bruckheimer? These action movies that are just wall-to-wall intense movement on the screen, and it's like exhausting. Like, you sit there and you're just, by the time you leave, you just want to go home and take a nap, because you're just like, your eyes have been moving constantly. They're being bombarded by images. And he wanted to make a movie that did the exact opposite of that, and that gave you like a space and a time to let your imagination drift, and for you to think about your own body, and to think about your breathing. And I know it seems totally absurd, but it really changed the way I thought about film too. And it makes me think of like movies, like, movies where there's so much action, or the tension is ratcheted up so intensely. Like, I find actually kind of unpleasant. I find myself just like, ugh, gosh, this is just, why am I subjecting myself to this? It's kind of like a torture. Versus movies that are more mellow, and maybe just my age again coming through, but like a good example is, I don't know if anyone's seen the Richard Linklater film Boyhood, which came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and which is a film that Richard Linklater made with Ethan Hawke, and I can't remember the actress's name, and a few other well-known actors, and then an unknown young actor, and they filmed it, I think, over the course of like 15 years, and they followed this boy. So they rather than casting a whole bunch of different actors, they actually filmed it over the course of 15 years. Every few years they'd get back together and film another scene as this boy slowly ages. And it's a beautiful film. I think it was nominated for a few Academy Awards. I'm not the only one who thinks it's a great movie. But one of the things I really liked about that movie is kind of how free of drama it is. Like, I won't give too many things away, but there's a scene where it starts off when he's like maybe 8 years old or something, and by the end I think he's like 19 or something. But there's one scene where he's maybe like 12 years old, and he's hanging out with some friends, and some people are drinking, and they're in some kind of warehouse, and some guy has like a gun that they've stolen, or their dad's gun or something, and they start waving it around, and it's at the time in the movie you're just like, oh my goodness, oh no, like, I've seen so many movies, I know how this is going to end. Somebody's going to get shot and somebody's going to die, and then like, oh, it's going to be all just the fallout from this. Maybe this boy gets arrested, and then the family drama of how is a family going to cope with the murder, or like, it's going to destroy the family. And long story short, nothing happens. the scene sort of ends and no one dies, and it's just that, and then they go to the next scene, and it is such a relief. Like, it's because it's totally unlike how most other movies are made, right? And I'm sure the producers or the studio said, well, okay, how about right here we'll have the police chase, and they round up all the kids, and then they're at the police station and being interrogated, and somebody gives, snitches on somebody, and then they get beat up in school, and there's none of that, right? So it's just like, when I saw that, I thought about Warhol. I thought about like this idea of making a movie that is sort of free of drama and doesn't exhaust you in the watching of the film. You kind of leave and you're like, that was a really nice movie. I feel really kind of like it's life affirming, and it's a beautifully shot film. It's highly recommended. I haven't given anything away, that one scene. There's plenty more, another couple of hours of the film in there, but long story short, there isn't any kind of massive drama like that. Okay, I'm just still plugging away on my painting here. So, we got two little Warhols. Let's see these side by side here. And trying to paint words like that is kind of tough. I don't, I'm sure there's some other people maybe did a better job than me. If you're struggling with it and you really don't want it, just paint over it. It disappears. No one will even have to know, right? That feels good. Look at the two simple little paintings. So I'm going to set these aside. I'm probably going to work on the other banana later. Just because, my goodness, I'll be here like all night long working on these. I don't know, I always underestimate how long it's going to take to make these paintings. Okay, this canvas is almost dry. Still a little wet. You know what, I am going to do a little bit of work on this other banana while that dries, because it's just, yeah. So, well, back to the salt mines, Michael. Let's, ooh, gotta plug this in. So, how am I going to do this version of the painting? So this is the one that I hand drew, and this time I'm now going to put some, I'm going to paint it, hand painted. So this is all hand painted from beginning to end and hand drawn. So not using any graphite paper at all. So it's the same sort of process. It's possible that I'll introduce a little bit more variation in here as I go. So it's likely this one is going to look a little bit different. Having painted it already once, I feel a little bit more freedom here to kind of, I feel like I kind of have it in my mind, some of these details already. So that's kind of the benefit of doing the same painting a number of times, is it's like I've driven the same road a few times, or if you're like a downhill skier, you've skied the route a couple times, then you got to do the race already know what to expect and what bumps you're going to face. So this should speed me up. I do notice my black paint is drying out, so that's why you can see I'm having to dip my brush back into the paint more frequently than I have at any time so far tonight. So that's I'm not surprised by that at all. In fact, I may, even though I have plenty of black paint still here on my palette to use, I could put some new paint in and use that instead, so that it'll make my life a little bit easier. What are some other Warhol related stories? Oh, again, so another great Warhol film, very famous film, is called Sleep, and that's another film that is often exhibited in museums, and people are invited to come in and literally sleep overnight in the museum while they watch the film, because it takes, I don't know how long the film is purported to be. I think it was actually only like 45 minutes long, the actual footage, but it's looped and edited in such a way that it lasts much longer than that. And it's another movie that, if you were to mention it to some people who are aware of it, they would say, "Oh yeah, isn't that the supposed to be the worst movie of all time, or the most boring movie ever made?" And because it was kind of this joke, and it was quite provocative by making it. What it is it's footage that, and I don't even know if he himself filmed it or one of his studio assistants, Gerard Malanga, or one of those other guys, or maybe it is Gerard Malanga who's sleeping. I can't remember, but he filmed, with their consent, he filmed somebody sleeping, a guy sleeping, and this fellow is in the nude, although I don't think you see any nudity, but it's somebody sleeping on a bed with the cover off, I think, and I think the person is actually asleep, and it's a bunch of close-ups of their body. So there'd be like a 10-minute shot of this guy's chest as it rises and falls, very close up, and you see the light kind of changing, the shadows moving across his body as the chest goes up and down. And then after 5-10 minutes, it cuts to a different view of, let's say, his nose. And then it cuts to another view of his legs or hands or eyelid, and it just sort of goes on like that. Again, I think it was filmed 45 minutes and then kind of cut together in such a way that it kind of repeats endlessly. But it's another one of those movies that you can watch, and again, like Warhol said, you want to be able to get up and leave. You can get up and go and come back, and you can go get a burger, and you certainly haven't missed anything. But I think of it a lot more like painting. You in the same way, like a Picasso or a Mary Pratt painting, or any of the other artists that we've studied, Frida Kahlo. You can. The painting itself doesn't change when you leave the gallery, and you can come back after lunch and you can take another look at it, and it's still the same painting. But what happens is you change as you're watching it, right? Your mind starts to drift, and you might start thinking about oh, okay, after this I'm going to go get those groceries, and oh yes, I forgot to write my friend, that email, I've got to reply to that. Oh, okay. And so your mind kind of drifts, and I just find it like a really generous way of experiencing art, because I find a lot of I make video art myself, and yet I cannot stand most video art. I find like super self-indulgent, and because it's time-based, you kind of sometimes have to sit there and you have to wait for something to happen, and then you missed the beginning. You gotta watch 45 minutes, and it's often like video and film in museums is really like unpleasant. And Warhol's, you can go in and you can sit there for 2 minutes, and you can kind of get the gist of it. You can also leave, or you could sit there for a whole day, and you're going to have a different experience, but you kind of got it, right? And I don't know, I just find like it just really completely changed my outlook on what a film can be or should be. And I know this is not the kind of stuff that's gonna break box office records or anything, but it's for those of us who aren't interested in Transformers the movie, it's I think much more up our line of wanting to see something that I just feel like it respects the audience in some way. It gives us room to fill some of the space with our own thoughts. And I'm right up there with I don't want that kind of experience all the time. At the end of the night, I like watching true crime movies. My wife and I, we like watching Mind Hunter or whatever else, like Unsolved Mysteries. Anybody seen the new reboot of Unsolved Mysteries? I love that. I'm a huge fan of Law and Order: Criminal Intent. I don't know if I'm the only one out there, but I just realized that's on Amazon Prime, and so I've been rewatching all those episodes every night. And I love falling asleep to it in the similar sort of way. One thing I like about kind of television like that is in a very Warholian sense, if I miss part of it, I don't really feel like it's a disaster. Like, I love watching television while I'm painting, and I'm obviously not really looking at the TV screen. I like watching Dr. Phil while I'm painting, and he's just blabbing on in the background like I'm doing right now. And I don't feel like, if I missed whatever Dr. Phil said right now, I got to go back and rewind. It's like, whatever. I kind of have a pretty good idea what's going on. It's sort of like the static that kind of fills the air, and it kind of keeps me company, as I think Warhol felt when he was younger, and that the movies and television and magazines and newspapers were his friends when he didn't have any other ones. I'm surprised that there's still so many people still here watching me. I'm sure probably the first group of people that tuned in when I began the show are no longer watching. So welcome to all those of you that have just tuned in and you're watching me paint away here. This is one of the longer paintings sessions that I've been on. And here's my pencil line. I'm just gonna go right through here and paint right over it. Even though it's not in the original, I can cover that up. I can put some dots wherever I want. So this is the version of the painting that I eyeballed. So I have two other versions that I did using carbon paper that are much more accurate. But I think, you know, when this one's done, I think it'd be pretty hard for most people to tell the difference, which is pretty satisfying to be able to do this. Okay, so I got the banana done. Now I'm gonna actually squeeze a little bit more paint, or some black paint here, not only because I'm running out, but that black paint that I was using was pretty dry. So let me see, let's go. So I'm gonna clean my brush, because of doing the words require a little bit more precision than painting up here. So not only adding more paint, but just cleaning the paintbrush off and getting rid of any of the paint that's kind of built up inside here. Okay, so I'm going to try painting the signature. Let's bring this down here. Okay. So this kind of thing is a little bit tricky. Doing any kind of lettering or words is definitely among the more difficult things that you can do with a paintbrush. Which is why when I used to do a lot of art, comic book inspired paintings, and I remember one of my teachers who also did a little bit of that many years ago. He was really excited because he was like, you know what, I do this same sort of lettering, and I don't think most people appreciate how difficult that is to do and to pull off. And that made me quite happy, because yeah, I don't think most people realize until you try to do it yourself that doing lettering with a paintbrush requires a great deal of patience. Let me see, do I have any tips on how to do this activity here? Let me see. I think part of it is patience and taking your time. And it is a learning process. There is a learning curve to be able to because it takes some time to be able to learn how to control a brush in order to kind of get to do these kind of little spins and turns. I'm always thinking, I'm trying to pull the paintbrush away from me, because if I want to paint towards me, I gotta change the angle of the brush. So it goes like this and like this. So you're always pulling the whereas if I try to do it like this, the brush is just going to stutter and it's going to bend, and you're sort of pushing the brush in the exact opposite direction that it wants to go. So that would be kind of the main takeaway. Is you don't want to fight the brush. You're sort of like pulling it behind you, kind of like a boat, like a tugboat or something, pulling a bunch of garbage or something. Okay. Right, so you see him moving up and down. And at the rate I'm going, our daughter's going to be, I'll be waking my daughter up by the time I'm done today's episode. See, well, I want to try to get all of these done tonight. My goal is eventually to edit everything together, or to edit these down to like 5-10 minute episodes, and then if people are interested, they'll know how to watch the rest of them if they want. They can dive in and watch the full 2-hour long episode. Not super happy with this W, but I always have to remember that, you know, these are going to be seen separately from the original. And the only time anyone would see the original is if maybe they pulled it up on their phone while they're looking at it. They're like, oh, yeah, I see how it's different. But, you know, if you were to hang this in your house, most people would be, oh, that's really cool, and they wouldn't notice, they wouldn't be able to compare or contrast any differences. I felt the same way about, well, the previous painting we did here, the Alex Katz one. At the time I was working on it, I felt quite unhappy with it. Because I was sitting there looking at the original the entire time, and all I could see was the differences and how I had failed to really capture it completely. But on its own, and I've had it up for a couple of days, I look at it and I feel really happy with it. I feel like, oh wow, it looks really great. And that's why I always tell people, just before you throw out your artwork, or you put a big X right down the middle of it, give it 24 hours, let it just, you know, sleep on it, and then come back and take a look at it the next day. And you'll often be very surprised about how different it looks. In the same way, you might finish a painting and be very happy with it. You look at it the next day and go, oh, ooh, I feel like I need to do a little more work on it. That also happens. Which is not a good feeling, because sometimes you leave and you're like, yeah, I'm awesome, what a rock star. And then you come back and you look and you're like, oh, not as good as I remember it being last night or this morning. Okay, I'm almost done this version. Very different version than the original. We'll compare them in a second here. Let me see, any kind of changes I can make to this while we're right here. I could fuss with a few things. But just going to See, there you go. Once you start fiddling with things. Deborah says, I am off. My Deb Warhol Bethel banana painting is done, and my soup can is almost done. Check out my unique can. Warhol would be proud of me. Going to have a cuppa with my hubby. Cheers, thanks. Thanks, Deborah, for sticking around for so long. Wow, you really stuck it out with me. I appreciate it. I'd love to see your version of the painting you made, so please send it to me using the links below, the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever else. I'm on pretty much all of them, and would love to see the work that you made. And on Saturday, I'm going to have a little special episode where I'll show all of the great works that you guys have made. So here, let's just take a quick second here to, let's see, look at all 3 of these banana paintings. So we'll put this one in between. How can we move this here, move this here, move this here, zoom out. So, obviously, some very, very different paintings. See all these tubes of paint casting shadows all over the place. Obviously, the signature is much bigger on this. Is the one that I hand drew versus these were using the graphite paper technique. And these are more accurate than this one. But I think on its own, until you see these, you kind of feel like, oh, this one looks perfectly acceptable. And I would be perfectly happy having this painting up on the wall. They're slightly different, but I mean, the banana itself is pretty close to these. Yeah, it's maybe could have gone a little bit more like that. The signature is really where we see the main differences. It's obviously way bigger than these ones here. And I did that mostly because I wanted to make it easier to actually do that part of the scene. To paint it would be easier the bigger it is. But all in all, I feel like these are 3 pretty good paintings that I'm happy with. So maybe while I'm right here, I'm going to autograph a few of these. Let's see, where am I here? Let's go from the ones that are dry already, if I remember my own name. Let's do one signed down. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay. So many paintings there. What, I'll end up with 4 different paintings. Okay, and then this one here. Okay, so a bunch of paintings done. Okay, but I still got one more to do. My goodness, this is already by far the longest episode I've done. So I'm gonna try to power through this and get this done as ASAP. My poor wife is up there dealing with our daughter all by herself, so. My apologies, sorry. I think that's actually too big. So I do need a smaller brush. You know, I was gonna try using a bigger brush to make things go faster, and then I'm like, you know what? If I do that, it's gonna turn into a big sloppy hot mess. And then all of the time I've spent on this will be wasted. So it's like, okay, if you're going to do it, might as well do it properly. And one of my favorite quotes of all time is, where did I hear, I can't remember who said it, but it was a chef talking to his other chefs. He said, slow down, we're in a hurry. And the idea being that, like, if you're, you know, these cooks in a kitchen, you know, in a busy dinner time service, as we don't have time to make a mistake, right? Everyone's expecting their food. People are spending hundreds of dollars on really expensive dinners. We have to get it right the first time. So slow down, get it right, cook the steak properly, or the tofu, or whatever needs to be done. You know, do it well, make sure you've done it well, and then plate it and send it out. Don't send out some like half-cooked chicken, and then it has to come back, and then we got to do the whole thing over again, and now everyone's upset. People are going to be upset because it's taking a long time, but if it's really good, they're going to be really happy. But if it takes a long time and it's awful and they got to send it back, boy, oh boy, are they going to be unhappy. So, do it right and do it once. Okay. Where's the original? So, let's pull up this view here. What needs to be done? I've got, I need the little red stripe down here. Let's get that in. Then I might do some of the black up here. I love, it makes me super happy doing these streams and making paintings and having, people support and watching, and it's a really great excuse for me to get into the studio, make paintings. I know I'm not making my own paintings here, but honestly, I feel like just doing these episodes is also making me a better painter, better artist. because I'm having to work on these fundamental exercises that are, you know, they're not easy, but the more and more I work on these fundamentals, the better I get. So even if you're a super experienced artist, going back to the basics is helpful. Okay, so as promised, I want to paint. I do have a metallic gold color already in a tube that I can use for this, but I'm going to make my own color here. So how do I mix a color that's going to look like a gold, right? If I just use yellow, it doesn't really look very gold at all, does it? So what we're going to do is we're going to mix a brown, and we're going to try to mix a yellowish brown, kind of on the warmer side, right? Gold is a bit of a warmer color, so what I need is I'm going to get my warm blue. Where's my warm blue? I'll put that here on my palette. I don't need much of it. And then let's mix this together. So let's just move this out of the way temporarily. Okay. So let's actually use a slightly bigger brush because I'll use this in a few places. So I got my warm yellow and red. So let's take this, a little bit of red. Right, and now we've got an orange. So I'm going to need a lot of it, so make this here. So we've got an orange, but we don't just want orange, we want a brown. So to make a brown, we take all three and mix them together. And then it's going to start going brownish. Whoops, that's too much. Okay, so let's look at this original. All right. Now it's not gold. It's not glittering in silver, or not silver. But it's also not yellow anymore. So when you're painting gold, you're going for a kind of this brownish kind of color. And depending on what colors you put next to it and around it, you can really kind of convey that gold quality. So here's the paint that I've mixed. And let's get my painting back out here. And let's apply this paint onto the surface. Anything, that's almost a little bit too bright. I could get a little bit more of the darker blue in there. Now, on the actual Campbell soup can, there is some sort of a logo here. I can't even, to be honest, remember what is there. Warhol came back and later on did other versions of this in the 80s where he actually painted this logo in there. Because when these paintings were first released, you know, Campbell's was not happy. I think they even tried to sue him because he was making money off of their image. It didn't occur to them until later on that he had probably done more for their brand than any advertising campaign they had ever done. And they eventually kind of hired him and asked him to kind of collaborate together. So, which is, you know, kind of funny how you know, things came full circle there. Anyway, there's that. Again, I could go darker. Some more blue into this mixture. Also don't mind if there's some kind of like brush strokes kind of appearing in here. Because his also had that same kind of a look. He, however, was using actual gold kind of paint in there. Okay, so we've got some gold running around up top here as well. This is not going to show up very well because I should probably have left this area blank, because now I'm trying to paint this color over is just getting absorbed by the red. If I really wanted to make this work, I would paint this back out, put some white paint in here, and then paint over top of it. But at the rate I'm going here, hardly seems, I don't know if it's worth it. That looks good enough. Okay. Paint all of this in. Come back here with black paint and finish this off. So here I'm being a little bit sloppy because I'm going to outline everything with black later on, so I'm not super concerned with being super accurate right here. If anything, I just want to make sure I don't want to have little gaps, so I'm kind of really making sure I really cover all of this pretty well. Okay, these fleur-de-lis here. This could be something if I really wanted, I could get sucked down a wormhole of trying to paint these properly. Again, he just used a stamp to do his. So I'm not going to worry too much about this detail. I'm just do these kind of quick versions of a fleur-de-lis. Oh, that's a little sloppy, isn't it? Slow down a little bit. Slow down, we're in a hurry, Michael. These just look like bugs or something down here. If you've been watching the show for over 3 hours now and you want to contribute to the show and you felt this is good enough entertainment, I would appreciate any donations you would like to contribute to the show. The links to the PayPal is down in the description below. Even using the Amazon link there to buy graphite paper or any of the other things I've talked about, I get a small kickback for that too, so you don't even have to buy the product that I've linked to. Anything you buy kind of within a certain period of time. It doesn't add anything extra to your shopping cart. You don't pay anything extra. It's just Amazon gives me a little bit of money back for encouraging people to browse their site for that. So you just click on the link and add something to your cart. That's another way of supporting me and the channel. Shelly McCool says, I promise I will watch the end of this sometime this weekend. It's after 9 here, and after being on the computer since 7:30 this morning for work, my eyes are going wonky. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shelly. I appreciate you stuck around for so long. Wow, we've got a lot of troopers in this class who are really super devoted. That makes me super excited. Okay, I think I've got that done with my gold, or brown as I made. So now all I got to do is paint the black. And then this one will be done. We'll have a lot of really good paintings I can feel really happy with by the end of today's session. So the other thing too is I use these rags. These are just like from t-shirts I've torn up, and I paint with them, and then I have a concrete floor here, so I just toss them on the ground and they dry, and then I can use them again once they dried. And that way I haven't used any paper towels that just go into a dump. These all get used over and over and over again until they're no longer usable. Okay, it's time to take a sip of tea here. So the home stretch. Whew. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to work my way from up here. Since this area is dry, there's still a little bit of wet stuff going on down there, so we'll paint here. Maybe, actually, I might even paint the Campbell's thing first. Just because that way I can reach over there. It's always a little bit of kind of strategizing here of how you're going to get something done without making a mess or you know, getting colors spread all over the place. Okay. And you'll forgive me if I rotate this. Since I'm going to be painting upside down for a few minutes, this will help me big time. So, let's go right into here. Generally, as you've seen, when I flip things upside down, I don't rotate the image so that everybody watching doesn't have to turn their painting upside down. But since I've been at this for so long, I'm sure if you really wanted, you could find this image. There's a Dropbox, includes the original in there to print out that you can refer to. That link is in the description below. If there's some people probably tuning in right now saying, uh-oh, something's wrong, everything's upside down. again, I'll also mention that I've been working on all of these paintings and I haven't dipped my paintbrush once into the water. Right? If I start dipping my brush into the water, I'm going to dilute the paint, and then I might have to go over top of those same brush strokes a few times because they're not opaque enough. So I'd rather do it once and walk away rather than 3 or 4 times, or even just a second time if I don't have to. A lot of people have the mistaken belief that when it comes to acrylic paint that we need to be dipping our brush into the water over and over and over again. And I just think that that's because most of us learn how to paint with watercolors in which you are dipping your paintbrush into the water over and over and over again. It's funny, I think about like Warhol just sitting around making all of these paintings, and I wonder what he was thinking at the time. Like, I wonder if he really thought if this was, I don't think he set out to like cause outrage and to cause a big kerfluffle. I really think he was pretty genuine about, like, I think he just really thought, oh, this would be kind of a fun thing to paint. Like, no one's done this before. How come no one's made a painting of a soup can? I don't think he, at least when he began, was kind of in the business of like controversy and causing like, you know, outrage. I legitimately think he just thought this would make for an interesting painting and just went in along with it. And I think he was probably quite surprised by, you know, the reaction it got, both positive and negative. And it's like, oh, really? Oh, wow, okay, maybe there's something here. Because again, at the time he made these paintings, he was a famous illustrator. He had become one of the most famous people in a certain kind of part of New York society through his illustrations of shoes and of dolls and children and things to illustrate magazines like in Vanity Fair and Vogue and all that kind of stuff. And I think for him, making art, fine art, was maybe almost a bit of a hobby. And then he exhibited the artwork, and things changed like pretty quickly. The reaction was pretty swift, and it generated a ton of interest, positive and negative, as I say. So we'll turn this around in a couple seconds and we'll see how well I've done. You know, when you're working upside down, it's obviously hard to tell how things are coming together, and it's not until you turn it the other way around that you might notice, oh, that needs to be changed. Oh, that needs to be changed. So that's to be expected. So, let's see. He did put a little bit of black right here. That looks good. I don't know. I feel pretty good about that. Okay, so while we're right up here, we're gonna do a bunch of this here. Again, I'm probably gonna simplify things a bit just out of the sake of time. This is also an area where it would be pretty easy to make some little mistakes that could drive you a little bit nuts. Right, where all of these different circles are overlapping, all these oval shapes. So I'm fully expecting already, I feel like I might have made a couple little mistakes here, that when I rotate this I could be a little disappointed. But like if this was something that was really important to me, I would go a little bit slower, and I would be turning the canvas around quite frequently to judge my progress, so that I could kind of catch any kind of error a little bit faster. Because right now I'm just sort of powering through here. You can also see that I'm kind of working my way down, so I'm not closing this loop because I don't want to get that far down and then have to, I reach over all of this paint. Interested to know where he got this image from. Like, if he took a photograph of a Campbell soup can, or this is from an advertisement. To be honest, I don't know where. I don't really know the full story behind this image. There is a great story about the Brillo box series of paintings that he made, and that is not only an important kind of moment in his career, and of global art, but also a really decisive moment in the history of Canadian art. If you're interested in reading about that. Because the Brillo box sculptures, paintings, whatever you want to think about them, were Brillo is like I think they're still around. Brillo box still around. Brillo pads, these kind of scrubbing pads, kitchen pads. He made these boxes out of wood, plywood that he silk screened the logos to the company on, and they were to be shipped to Canada for an exhibition. But the thing is they got stopped at the border, and Customs Canada kind of refused to let them over unless this huge duty was produced. And because they said that they were not art, they were like industrial products or something. And it caused this huge controversy, which ended up requiring the National Gallery and all these different artists. There was a big court case, and all these people were called to testify and argue about what is and isn't art. And many people have written books about it, but it was a big deal. It was when would this have been? That would have been, I think, in the late 60s, probably 68, 69, around then. And there was and it was big not only in Canada but worldwide, because, and of course Warhol loved it, because it any publicity is good publicity to him. And eventually they were declared to be art, and I think the exhibit went forward. A number of people in the Canadian art world were very embarrassed by that, and they felt like that whole trial had sort of set Canadian art back decades and made us, humiliated the country in front of the world, and all the kind of things you might expect people to say. But I think it was interesting because it was a conversation people were having around the world anyway. It just finally kind of came all to a head because of Warhol and this exhibition. Okay, so let's take a look when we turn it around. A little bit clumsy. A little clumsy in places. Let me see if I just do a quick cleanup here. I can always touch that up with a little bit of white if I want to later on. So it's just this bottom bit. I'm going to outline the sides though. Okay, let's turn this back the other way. And I'm going to work on the soup. I was worried about this shape inside here. A little bit too tight to do this, but so this time I'm going to do the line inside first. And then I'm going to outline it. So this way I can make sure that I've got enough room around those outer edges. Same thing we'll do. This on the outside. Oops. Missed that little serif on the top. Thank you, Tigre Rouge Blitz, for your comments there. I appreciate it. Dat highlight on the can, though. You mean up here, maybe? Getting close here, folks. Appreciate everybody who's stuck around for so long while I've been working on this. It's arrived. I can hear my wife upstairs giving our daughter a bath, which is usually my role. One of my favorite parts of the day, which I've now sacrificed for this project here. But it's all good. Bath time is so much fun. Our daughter is such a happy kid. I'm so excited. She loves her time in the bathtub, so I'm sure she could care, our daughter could probably care less whether it's myself or my wife giving her the bath, but I know my wife appreciates that time she gets to spend with her, so it's not, we're all good. It does make me sad, though. I miss that quality time. There's always tomorrow. See where some of my original pencil lines have disappeared, but that's okay. If this is not supposed to be here or there, let's put okay, the final countdown. You can see this black is already kind of drying up and giving me these lumps. Which is a bit of a pain, but again, if this was something that was a little bit more precious to me, I'd probably use some new paint at this point here to and clean my brush, but it's the final countdown. And then this video is demonetized 'cause I'm singing somebody else's songs while I'm painting someone else's paintings. Oh, the irony. Okay. Look at that. Warhol on the left, Markowsky on the right. Feeling pretty good. Tigger Rouge Blitz says, yes, the top part of the lid, that white highlight, it's not even white. Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, great job of him to, you know, be able to just by using the contrast of black and white to really capture that sense of the highlight really well. Oh, this drives me a little bit nuts. I'm gonna widen this out a little bit. As I said, I knew there was going to be a few little problems here. Yay. Yeah, a little wonky up there, but at the end of the day, who's going to notice? Shamsa. Hey, Shamsa, nice to see you. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is another painting for the books. And I'll sign this here in a second. Okay, so earliest video ever made here. November. It's still November 19th? 1962. Okay. So look at that. We got a whole bunch of paintings done today. Let's move that out of the way. Let's see. This is the other big one. Let's do this. Look at those. Pretty good for a couple of hours work. And I got 3 of these ones. Three bananas and 1 soup can. I feel pretty good about having produced all of that work today. So thank you everybody for tuning in and watching another one of these episodes. I know that probably very few of you made it through all of the past, almost 4 hours together. If you did, you are a champion. I appreciate you tuning in and following. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate all your support. Share with your friends. On Saturday evening, I'm going to be sharing all of the great work that you guys have made, so please send me your images as soon as possible so I can put the show together. I've got probably about 40 or so images so far, but the more the better. The links to my Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Twitter, Twitter, Facegram are all below. Anyway, we'll see you guys on Saturday, and we're not going to be making a painting that day. We're just going to be having some fun celebrating the great work that you guys have made. Next class, we're going to be painting a painting by another great artist, Molly Lambeauback. A lesser-known artist, but a great artist nevertheless, and that's going to be a little bit more simple than this, so you won't have to use all of the tools that we've used so far today. Enjoy the rest of your evening, morning, wherever you are on planet Earth, and thank you so much for joining me here in my studio. We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.